Our sixth and high-level panel will focus on the overall theme of this year's IPI Vienna seminar, namely, is the UN fit for purpose? And how can multilateralism be improved? Terry Larson, president of IPI, was supposed to chair this high-level session, but since he couldn't attend all the meetings yesterday, he has asked Walter Kemp, senior director of IPI in Vienna, to moderate, and Terry will take part as a panelist. Walter has been introduced yesterday, so I ask Walter now, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, and welcome to the sixth and final session. We have about an hour and a quarter, because we have to finish punctually before 1. I think you all know the panelists, and their bios are in the program, but let me introduce them briefly. On my right is Michael Muller, who's the acting director of the United Nations in Geneva, with a long and distinguished career in the United Nations. On my left, my boss, the president of IPI, Terry Larson, who's also, I think, the longest-serving Under-Secretary General in the UN system. At the moment, has a double-headed function. He's also responsible for the UN's work in Lebanon. To my far left, Dr. Kande Mkela, who's the outgoing head of Sustainable Energy for All, who's twice the director of UNIDO here in Vienna, and perhaps the future president of Sierra Leone. This is something we can discuss. And on my far right is Jan Kiekert, who's the Director General for Political Affairs here in the Austrian Foreign Ministry, also with a long career in diplomacy, particularly in the Balkans, and the future Austrian permanent rep to the UN in New York. This panel is called Fit for Purpose. There's no question mark. It's supposed to be a positive, forward-looking view at enhancing multilateralism and international institutions for a safer future. For those of you who didn't attend all of the first 5 sessions, I'm not going to summarize them all, but I wanted to highlight a few issues which I thought would be particularly relevant for this panel. Yesterday, the point was made that some states are losing confidence in the UN system, but on the other hand, the nature of contemporary threats is such that states have to work together. There's no alternative to multilateralism. It was pointed out that there are difficulties between member states, that the geopolitical situation is probably more complicated than it's been since the end of the Cold War. On the other hand, there are a number of UN agencies and institutions that are doing good work, like the UNHCR and others. Some said that there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Someone actually said this is the only wheel that we have. And yet, there are other constellations starting to form, like the G20, stronger focus on regional organizations, and other actors. So although there is still the one big wheel, there are other smaller wheels. There will be no introductory speeches by the panel. We want to do this as interactively as possible, but I wanted to ask each of the panelists how they have seen the discussion so far and how they would like to react to particular points, starting with Michael Muller, and then I have a specific angle that I would like each of the other 3 of you to take. But Michael, in terms of the broader perspective, what is your view on making the UN more fit for purpose?
Well, let me first start by saying that I keep being a little irritated at the term fit for purpose, because it's not always that it's clear what the purpose is. Mm-hmm. Having said that, and keeping the focus on the future and the questions that are being asked from us, let me maybe start from something that Professor Novak said, which is the description of that tripod between peace, development, and human rights. This is a reality and a sort of intellectual awareness that we have developed over the past few years that has become much more rich. We understand intellectually the complexity of the problems that are facing us. We understand, therefore, also to some extent the complexities of the solutions that that we need to apply to these problems. The problem is that the system and the structures haven't quite followed suit. And therefore, it stays at the discussion level. And it's even at times, even doesn't go that far. I was a little bit frustrated sometimes over the last day and a half, because when we speak about peace and security issues, we talk about the Security Council, we talk about the use of force, we talk about only a very fairly narrow bandwidth of the tools that are at our disposal to do the kind of stuff that we need to do. When we talk about prevention, again, we talk about preventive diplomacy. We talk about trying to figure out how the council works better, how peacekeeping works better. But the fact is that that is only a very small part of what the system as a whole is able to deliver and has expertise to deliver. I sometimes compare it to the iceberg, where the 10% is what we see as the Security Council that doesn't work. Our inability to get peace in a number of crisis areas that we are looking at today, our lateness in responding to Ebola, etc. But the fact is that what is under the surface is what really has an impact and a relevance to every single person on this planet every day. And we can tend to forget that. And I think that in order to make the system, both make the system better in the sense that internally, a sort of an internal culture change, if you want, that is very much needed. I'll come back to that in a second. But also changing the perception of the public, and therefore also our policymakers and our politicians in the capitals and our own colleagues, to be very honest, to bring back that element and rebalance a little bit the knowledge of what the system is and what it can do is going to be important. We have a system that has accumulated an absolutely extraordinary amount of expertise and experience and has some fantastic human capital that needs to be rejigged somehow and used better to, as has been said several times over the past few days, to make the system much better at confronting the problems of today and certainly those of tomorrow. I think that need is coming to the crunch this year, and particularly the beginning of 2016. We have a whole series of policy frameworks that are being developed right now and are being negotiated. They're all going to come together. The SDGs, the climate change, the financing for development. We've just finished Sendai and a number of other issues that are going to be discussed in the course of this incredibly important year. All of these are going to come together in the implementation. You can't really talk about implementation of SDGs without talking about the implementation of the policy framework. Hopefully we will get on climate change and all the others as well. In order to do so, and short of a very deep restructuring of the international system and the UN system, which is not about to happen, we are forced to find a better way of working. We need to get around the problem in order to get to where we need to do if we are going to have even half a chance of successfully implementing some of these policy frameworks. And in my mind, that means a very, very different way of working, breaking down the silos, doing away with business as usual and all the other cliches that we apply in these discussions. But it's a real need, and it's something that's happening. I think when you talk to heads of agencies, and Mr. Juncker certainly can probably speak about that as well, there's a very clear understanding that business as usual is not a viable option. What needs to be done, and that's where I come back to what I said before, that it is also an internal culture change, is to translate that understanding into action within the systems and change the bureaucracies to become a much more integrated and much more able to work together and to attack these problems together. Mm-hmm. So the bones are there, if you want. The substance is there. And we need to figure out how to do it better. And that brings me to the last point, which is another source of frustration, and it was touched upon by several of the discussants yesterday. I was particularly struck by General Mood when he was talking about peacekeeping, which is that it's all very well to sit and talk about how bad or how ineffective or how this, that, or the other the UN system is. Because at the end of the day, the fact that it is where it is entirely, to a large extent, the result of inactivity and too timid political support by the member states. We heard from our colleague from the Vienna office here about zero growth budgets and the lack of investment by member states into programs at a time in our history where we are faced with extraordinary challenges that simply will not be solved if we continue down this road. So there is also a culture change in capitals. There is and it's a collective change of mindset that we need to work on, and it needs to be worked on together. I mean, I can talk about this for hours, but I'll stop here and just we'll come back to maybe some of these issues again later.
Thanks. Terry, one region where multilateralism is clearly not working, not necessarily just the UN, but multilateralism as a whole, is an arc of instability going from Somalia through Yemen, Syria, Libya, into North Africa. How do you explain the inability of the international community to do anything useful in that part of the world? And what are some of the lessons learned from Lebanon, which, compared to the others at the moment at least, seems relatively stable?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that Lebanon today looks as if it's an island of stability within this arc of instability, which is a paradox. I will come back to it. I think you have to look at, the answer to your question has to be looked upon on several layers, because there is the political issues, the prevention, resolution, and management of the conflicts, and then is the range of issues, the last panel discussing the humanitarian issues, development issues, etc. So let me first say a little bit about the political issues. Of course, there are UN envoys in all these countries, and if you look at the results, it doesn't look as if the UN is particularly successful. And then the question is why? And here, I do not think one can answer that question conceptually, but I think, and I don't know the specifics of what my colleagues in these countries are doing, except from the newspapers and what I read in UN reports. I don't want to comment on that specifically. But let me say something generally about it, because when you, at the political level, are an envoy, there is a toolbox. And then related to the specific situation in these countries, you have to choose if you are going to use a screwdriver or a hammer in order to address the problem. So you have to analyze the problem. So let me illustrate it by my two experiences under Kofi Annan in Lebanon, where I first was Kofi Annan's special envoy to negotiate Israel's military withdrawal from southern Lebanon in the year 2000, and later in 2004, where I negotiated Bashar al-Assad's military withdrawal from Lebanon. He had 45,000 troops and a significant intelligence apparatus there, which was withdrawn. And there are some in the toolbox here. I remember very well, Kofi came to me and said, I'm going to call the foreign ministers of Russia, the United States, the UK, and the US, and I'm also going to communicate with the Iranians. And he said, my demand will be, I will not allow you to travel there unless you are the only envoy. Okay, and this is very important, because if you have multiple envoys, they undermine each other. Because then you give your partners the opportunity, if they don't like you, they go to another guy and they play them against each other. So this is tool number one. And I spoke to my good friend Bernardino, who is handling Libya now, and he told me this is precisely his problem. I mean, the multiple envoys running around, he doesn't know what they are saying, who they're speaking to, etc. So in a way, I don't believe in a kind of general theory of negotiations. I believe in the toolbox. And there are quite a few tools there. I'm looking a little bit at Najib here, who's now is the head of IPI's office in the Middle East and North Africa, because he was in my team on both those occasions. So you might correct me if I say something which is not factually entirely correct. And then when I embarked on my travels on both those two occasions, Kofi looked at me and he said, Michael, you were working for him at the time, and he said, You see, if you go and you say you only represent me, you will look weak. You have to represent something broader. So I instruct you to go to Moscow, to Washington, to Paris, to London, and also to speak with an Iranian counterpart. Because I want you to go to Lebanon and say, I'm not only representing Kofi Annan, I'm representing all these guys, and what I'm saying is also their opinion. So this is another tool. The UN are sometimes too weak in order to have an impact on the partners. And then he also told me, and when you've done that, you have to go to Cairo and Jordan and a couple of other places in the Gulf, and to say, I'm also representing these guys. So we managed to create a consensus, and when I remember when I saw Bashar al-Assad, the first time I said, look, I'm not only representing Kofi Annan, I'm representing all these guys, and if you want to check on it, place a call to the capitals and check. This is number two. And then number three, I can bore you with a very long list of tools here, but I'll just mention the last one. I believe very much in the principle of personalizing your relationship with your counterparts. It's risky business, because if you create an emotional relationship to your partners, the risks of a fallout which becomes emotional and there is bad blood is high. But if you don't have a personal relationship to the decision makers, you can never get under their skin. So what I try to do is, as fast as possible, to go to first name with whoever it is. The president, the foreign minister, prime minister, what it is, and to have family dinners with them and all that. Because unless you get into a personal relationship with the actors, it's very, very difficult to do it. And that's why I don't believe in telephone diplomacy. I believe in face-to-face diplomacy, and I believe in, and of course my staff didn't like that at all, I believe in one-on-one conversations, where the staff has to patiently wait in the hall until the conversation is over. So instead of answering your question by talking about these single countries, I just wanted to share with you what I do and what I would have done, but I don't know how my colleagues are handling this. And sometimes I would also like to add here, the big powers of this world, particularly the biggest power in this world, likes normally to handle such stuff themselves, and they don't want the UN to be involved. But if the situation is so tricky that the chances of success is extremely small, then it's given to the UN. Because then the UN has to take the blame at the end of the day. And I think, for instance, in Yemen today, this is the case. Nobody wants to touch it, so they just dump it on the UN, knowing fully well that a success is nearly impossible. And I can chip in Syria here as well. Let me finish this round by saying, fit for purpose, this is the main topic for this panel. I think we should also ask, what is the UN not fit to do as well? And sometimes NGOs, also in the political field, can do a better job than the UN. Because the UN has a political framework as a membership organization, which is very complex and sometimes very paralyzing, as we see in that arc of instability, particularly in the Security Council. And then an NGO can do, which is not bound by the same frameworks and restrictions, can do a better job. So what the UN can do then is to make an alliance with another multilateral organization or an NGO who basically does the job, but with an authority from the Secretary General, or in the best of cases also with a green light at least, or a blessing from the Security Council. So I think, again, I'm back to the toolbox. There are many tools in this toolbox, and many people operate if there is only one tool. But that's not true. You have to be imaginative here. You have to be innovative. I can elaborate on this later. I've spoken too much already.
Okay. I want to pick up on your last point, which relates to your second tool in the box also, on the importance of building coalitions, and ask Kande Yamkela, because the concept of sustainable energy for all is a bit of a private-public partnership, including the private sector and civil society. That would be my first question. But the second one would relate to, we've heard a lot of different risks and challenges, pandemics, fragile states, corruption, demographic growth. Sierra Leone has many of these challenges all in one relatively small country. So my second part of the question would be how you see some of these broader trends that we've discussed, but in the context of the future of Sierra Leone.
Thank you very much. Is the UN fit for purpose? Well, I have been given the unique opportunity to take up one of the most important challenges globally today, and that will be with us in the 21st century. And then the Secretary General asked me, can you create a hybrid solution and a hybrid institution for it, different from what we're doing? And I thought it was easy, but it's very, very difficult to get the UN. It's fit for purpose to a certain extent, but some of the challenges are way beyond the UN's resources, technology, or knowledge. I was asked to lead UN Energy, almost 8-9 years ago. For 20 years, the background is for 20 years, we could not discuss energy issues in the United Nations in a civilized way. The moment you raise energy, it's a discussion breaker. The first Rio World Summit on Sustainable Development, no talk about energy. Rio +10 in South Africa. Some governments wanted to put energy on the table, discussion breaker. So we created a loose structure called UN Energy, collection of agencies to talk about energy. And so I was asked as the first head of agency after about 4 or 5 years, they said, can you head UN Energy? Because you're always talking about energy even though you're not an energy expert. I said, well, it's based on my reality. Growing up in Sierra Leone without power, being a minister of trade and industry, and there's no power to run the factories, create jobs. Then working in Nigeria for UNIDO, the country in Africa that has all the energy resources the rest of us dream about, but yet they can't guarantee 24 hours energy power supply in one day without interruption. And the factory is standing there, no job. Say, wait a minute, in the midst of plenty, how could they not have energy? My first year heading UN Energy, I realized quickly that the solutions we needed were way outside in the private sector. The knowledge, the technology. And it's here, the question is about speed and scale. For climate change to be solved, you need a major transformation in global energy systems because 60 to 70% of the emissions come from energy systems. You can't achieve the Millennium Development Goals or Sustainable Development Goals without access to energy. Clean water will not be pumped. Growth will not be ensured for many economies. So how do you grow economies, spread prosperity, if they don't have access to energy? India, Sierra Leone. But of course, if the rest of the world is emitting so much greenhouse gases, we suffer anyway. All of us have a room in climate hell. I was asked to do this. So I said, okay, I sent a memo to the Secretary General, and somebody sat on it for 3 months. Because I had proposed a multi-stakeholder group. And of course, I had listed all these big names, CEOs of corporations and presidents, and I think somebody may have said, who the hell does he think he is? 3 months, no response. Now, I'm just being realistic, how difficult it is to get change. Because the orthodoxy prevents movement. So I proposed this, ideas from my colleagues in the UN Energy, 22 agencies, sat on it 3 months, so we went through the back door. And Ban Ki-moon heard about it. Of course, he was then pushing his climate change agenda. So we went to him, 5 heads of agencies, including Hakim Steiner. We said, look, your climate change story is not enough. You gotta deal with energy. And we are suggesting you do the following. He said, do the terms of reference, send it in. We had a Secretary General that immediately saw the need. And so that's what we've tried to do now. Doing a creative coalition of companies, civil society, and member states to drive the energy agenda with a clear goal. First, let's put energy central to the development debates. And it took us 6 years. Lobbying, promoting, organizing, convening, using the unique convening power of the UN. And I tell you, for that, it's fit for purpose. You don't have any other place that treats Sierra Leone the same way it treats the United States. We're all equals. Why? If a big power does not do things right, we suffer. So we have to have a voice. So that convening power we capitalized on. But then we added the convening power of the World Bank. Ban Ki-moon called the president of the World Bank, said, look, energy is so important, I can't do it alone. Can you join me? So we use our collective convening power and bring other stakeholders. And we've achieved a lot. We have an SDG, central to the development debate, which we couldn't do in 20 years. We combined the convening power of the United Nations, gave a voice to civil society, poor women in India, in Gujarat. We brought them in to tell the world what solar power would mean for them, for livelihoods, yeah, for access to water, for irrigation. At the same time, we brought CEOs of Statoil, of renewable energy companies as a collective, but using the UN and the World Bank alternatively. So using the convening power of the UN in a creative way. The difficult part. The last panel the professor mentioned, we need to do more with the private sector. Well, I thought that was easy too, that it was obvious to everybody. Well, the private sector said to me, Yumkela, if you needed CSR money and charity, that's easy. We can sign checks. I say, no. We need bigger transformation in energy systems. In Austria, in the United States, in India, and in Sierra Leone as well. They say, then you need to talk to the investment people. That's where the big money comes in, for power plants, for renewables, and so on. That's where the technology is. Well, go back to the UN and try to get those guys in a decision-making process. And they give you the rule book. The United Nations Charter says it's only member states. Well, how is the guy going to commit $10 billion to global energy systems if he's not part of the decision-making? But that's a long story. I transition quick to Sierra Leone. The UN invested a lot of money in bringing peace and stability to Sierra Leone. 17,000 troops. At that time, it was the largest peacekeeping force. Millions of dollars. One of the most brutal civil wars. The civil war started in Guinea and in Liberia, spilled over to us. That democracy has been built. We've had 3 successful elections, but we're at a major transition now, between now and 2018. Some of the peace experts say, you know, a country now has embraced democracy if they can have at least 2 successful transitions from one party to the other. We're facing that test in 3 years. We did 1 successful transfer of power. Will we be successful the next time? In the middle of this transition, trying to consolidate democratic institutions, Ebola hit. I believe Ebola exposed the fragility of those countries. 3 countries that are always at the bottom of the Human Development Index, always at the bottom 5, but 3 of the most wealthy countries in the world. Guinea, the largest deposit of bauxite in the world. All the major corporations you can imagine are there, because they have almost 24-30%. Liberia and Sierra Leone, amongst the top 6 deposits of iron ore in the world. Sierra Leone, one of the purest deposits of titanium. And guess what? In the last 4 years, we discovered oil and gas. And then Ebola hit. I say to Sierra Leoneans, the war did not start in Sierra Leone. It came there, it became worse. Governance was a problem. You can't transform these countries without clear, committed governance. Ebola came from Liberia. When it arrived in Sierra Leone, the numbers are bigger. We're still not over it. Again, governance issues. It exposed governance macro level, but sectoral governance as well. A lot of donor money went into health sector. Was it enough? We don't know, because we didn't have enough matrices to measure whether the investments were effective. What happened with the Ebola resources that were kicked in? Did we use them effectively? Finally, in dealing with that emergency, did we create the capability to prevent the next epidemic? If Ebola comes back, I tell you, it will be worse than now. I am not sure the capabilities were built in. We did a fire brigade quick to solve it. But did we leave back the capabilities? The same might apply to peacekeeping. The same might apply to democracy. Do we leave back capabilities for these countries to deal with crises when they come? Or do we have to send in the helicopters and the peacekeepers again? I'll hang there, maybe we'll come back. But the whole issue as well of natural resource governance as it relates to prosperity and stability in those countries, or is it the 1%? After the conflicts, the 1% comes back and they become super rich, forgetting what caused the war before. And immediately people are comfortable with big money. They begin to undermine every democratic institution to stay in power longer. And somebody mentioned preventive diplomacy. I advise the UN now. you better take a look at Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea again. Otherwise, in 10 years, you send the peacekeepers back. Big money coming in suddenly. When we have not learned our lessons of what caused the war, and we say we only deal with Ebola, we'll have to come back and do something even more drastic. Because I see democracy dying fast in some of those countries. By the way, context, I just arrived yesterday from Sierra Leone. I was in the neighborhood.
Okay, I'm sure we'll have a few questions about that. Also, this issue, it's been brought up in other sessions. How do you not just have short-term responses to longer-term problems? That attention spans are short, so one day it's Ebola, the next day it's Yemen, but the staying power, the structures are not there, so a few years later you're going to have to deal with it again and it might even be worse. Jan Kiekert, we've been talking a lot about big problems and great powers. Where do you see Austria fitting into part of the solutions and drawing on the 60 years of experience in the UN system?
I fear that after Kanda's enthusiasm, I will strike a more somber note. Being a practitioner and being a representative of what I call from an SMS, a small or medium-sized country, I think I have a certain sense of realism. You talked in your introduction that even the biggest powers admit there's no alternative to multilateralism. I fear that there's an uneven interest in multilateralism. There is a kind of pick and choose attitude by the powerful countries of this world, and a dependency of the SMSs, of us, the small and medium-sized countries. If I compare the international rule of law actually as a life insurance for us, for the small and medium-sized countries, whereas for the big powers, multilateralism is as Terje said, if they can't solve it themselves, they will dump it on the UN. It is shackles for exerting their power. And just a couple of illustrations. I mean, the U.S., the Bolton times where it was openly against the UN are gone for the time being. But even this administration of Mr. Obama cannot get through Congress a basic international conventions on disability, not to talk about CTBT, not to talk about UNCLOS. So it is seen as negative to adhere to international legal frameworks. The other case, of course, is Russia. With the Ukrainian example, blatant breach of international law, the military annexation of a part of a neighboring country. You can criticize as much as you want the United States for military interferences, but they never annexed, to my knowledge, if we don't take the time of the colonial time in the 19th century, beginning of 20th, another country. So this is a dangerous precedent for the whole world order, insofar as it shows somehow that if you're powerful, the law of power prevails over the power of law. And yesterday was also discussed about China and the South China Sea. I mean, there goes a country and just builds an artificial island on disputed areas. Just because the contester for the claims is a rather weak and smaller country. So I think this is the big challenge we are facing, that there is a dichotomy of how to make use or how to support multilateralism. Mm-hmm. And there maybe the SMSs have to come together, get over the north-south divide, which is still dividing us in the UN system, and say, well, we have common interests, which are not pinned down to whether you're developed or not, but it's because we need a multilateral system. It's our own survival.
I want to break it open to the floor because we have about half an hour, but before I do, I want to touch on the specific issue of Secretary General, because now we're in a process of trying to select the next one. And I want to ask Terry and Michael in particular, as UN veterans, does it really matter who the Secretary General is? You said that perhaps states expect too much from the UN, but maybe we expect too much from the UN Secretary General. So why is it so important who the next UNSG is, Terry?
Number one, personalities matter, and particularly in negotiations, but it also depends very much on the self-perception of the Secretary General. And my favorite metaphor for the dilemmas which a Secretary General is facing is that a Secretary General has multiple roles, and they are sometimes very inconsistent. And let me use the metaphor of hats. So he wears the mitre of the secular pope. He protects the norms of humanity in the world. So he has to stay in his pulpit and be the bully towards everybody who's violating humanitarian principles. He's the secular pope. But then secondly, he is also the primary diplomat of the world. He's a political prince. He wears a golden crown. So he has to go and sit at the negotiating table. But here is the first dilemma, because if you slap the faces of people and then you go and sit with them afterwards and say, I want to make a deal with you, it doesn't work. Which means that you, and again, it's the toolbox, you have to calibrate. So when I was, which I still am, sometimes the political envoy, then sometimes you have to choose. Slap faces, fine, but there are consequences. But if you see that there is a possibility of making a deal which can resolve the issue at some point in time, I mean, it's counterproductive to slap faces. So it's the secular pope, it is the political prince, but then he also wears a top hat or a bowler. He is the CEO of one of the most impossible conglomerates of the world, because he has very little power. I mean, look at the agencies and programs. For most of them, he has zero power. They can say and do whatever they like, but he is kept responsible. So this is an enormous challenge. How do you handle that? I mean, if a human rights rapporteur says something which is fundamentally disagreed with, he can't do anything about it. But he's perceived as responsible. And even if the Security Council is completely paralyzed on something, I mean, many people blame the Secretary General because they think he can kind of instruct the Security Council. So you have to have the Secretary, and then there is another hat, and that's the blue helmet. I mean, he has the second largest standing army in the world. So all these hats, all these roles, and let me illustrate the dilemma there. Because, again, a peacekeeping operation is per se non-partisan. It is neutral. Okay? While in his political role, sometimes he can't be neutral. He has to take a stand. He has to confront people. He has to confront state and non-state actors, etc. But if he does that and there's a peacekeeping operation, it can provoke the killing of peacekeepers. This, if I can make a little footnote here, this, in my opinion, and again, it's one size doesn't fit all. It's integrated missions, which is now very faddish in the UN. Sometimes it's good, but sometimes it's very bad. Because if you have an integrated mission, you merge peacekeeping and the political functions. And sometimes that's very, very dangerous. Because on the peacekeeping side, DPKO, they will basically say, you have to be careful here, don't say anything, don't rock the boat. We have to preserve peace. While the Department for Political Affairs will say, we have to go to the root causes of the conflict. This is just a temporary thing. We have to address vigorously and rigorously the political issues. So again, there is a balancing act. So in these cases, integrated missions is not a good idea. So I could go on and on about this, but so there are conflicting roles, and a Secretary General has to understand deeply, broadly, and fully these dilemmas, and he has to handle them. And sometimes there are not general solutions to it. You have to weigh it, you have to show good judgment, you have to find compromises, etc., and you have to do that in concrete situations. So going back to your question, a good Secretary General has the self-insight to understand this and must have the skills to fill all these roles.
Michael?
And that's a very tall order.
Michael, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. As you asked the question inside of me, the answer was, are you kidding me? It's even more important today, I think, to come back to what Jan said before, this business that we are rapidly moving into, where might is right, the sort of massive walking away from international law, from rules that we have painstakingly put in place over the past decades on how to rule our planet is very worrying. It's probably more worrying than many of the crises, that sort of more punctual crises that we have. A Secretary General is the physical manifestation of the fact that the UN system, or the international system, is more than the sum of its parts. And his power, or her power rather, hopefully this time around, is a moral one. The moral voice, particularly in a fragmented world as we have today, cannot be underestimated and is really needed if we are going to come back to some of this rules-based management of our planet. So to me, this new, the selection of a new Secretary General is incredibly crucial for the next 10 years and beyond. I hope that member states will rise to the challenge. The process itself is undergoing some changes and becoming minimally more democratic, I hope at least. It's a good start. There's a fissure, if you want, on the sort of very tight control of that process by the permanent file. But it's incredibly important.
Okay, we'll open it up to the floor, and I would also invite Andrew Whitley, if he's still here, at some point during the Q&A to tell us about the proposal of the elders on how to change the system of selecting the next SG. But we now have about half an hour for questions and answers or comments to this distinguished panel. Yes, Richard.
Richard Gowan from New York University. One point and then one question primarily to Terje. The point is, it's very easy to blame big powers for dumping stuff on the UN. But it's absolutely crucial that the UN should be there to get dumped on. Because if we didn't have the UN to at least alleviate the messes that the big powers can't resolve, those messes would get worse. So you have to have the humanitarian mechanisms to mop up in a case like Syria, where no political agreement is possible. And I don't think we should be sniffy about that. We should be proud that the UN is there as the final safety net when the great powers cannot cooperate. A policy implication of that is we have to be much more serious about funding the humanitarian work of the UN in places like Syria, where there is a huge gap between what is needed and what is being provided at the moment. And I think European countries are falling short in terms of funding the humanitarian system. Now, the question also concerns the Middle East and is about Iran. If there is an Iran deal, the Security Council and the IAEA are going to have a very, very central role in the implementation of that deal going on for years in terms of monitoring and assessing Iran's performance. This brings back very bad memories of how the Security Council performed over Iraq and some of the Secretariat's failings. Terje, do you believe that the UN system can actually monitor an Iran deal, or will it be oil for food all over again?
Okay, we'll collect a couple more. Manfred Novak.
In the present situation, would you think, first of all, whether it's a good idea, and secondly, if so, whether it's feasible to move towards a standing United Nations military force, whether it's a whatever, preventive, rapid reaction force or whatever, but some kind of standing military force as envisaged originally in the UN Charter?
Okay. Andrew Whitley.
Thank you for inviting me to speak. First, a very brief word about the elders, in case some in the room are not familiar with it. We're an independent organization of global personalities founded by Nelson Mandela, and Kofi Annan is our current chair. We launched a set of proposals in early February on strengthening of the United Nations. We did that in Munich at the Security Conference. And one of the 4 elements, the one that we feel is most urgent, for obvious reasons, is the choice of the next Secretary General. I fully agree with Michael about the importance of the choice, and with Thierry in terms of his very appropriate description of the difficulties of the job. And it's precisely for Thierry's reason that we feel that the process should not be left to the P5 to decide, as they have done up until now, behind closed doors. Ultimately, while it may be in appearance an open process, in practice it's not. And it hasn't been for many years now, in which the P5 effectively cook it up among themselves as to who is going to be the next Secretary General, and looking usually for a fairly malleable personality who they feel owes some loyalties to one or most of them, or is not objectionable to one of them. So what we have put forward is that, first of all, let's go back to the Charter, which says that it's the UN Assembly, General Assembly, that decides on the recommendation of the Security Council, and not the other way around. But in practice, because the Security Council only puts forward one candidate, it's a rubber stamp, and the General Assembly is effectively disempowered from this process. So as there is a principle of democratic legitimacy, and all member states have clearly an interest in the choice of this personality, our feeling is that the process needs to be opened up. Within the realms of practical politics, we all understand the importance of keeping the P5 on board for this process. So what we've suggested is twofold. First of all, that the candidatures should be open to all on the basis of merit. This obviously runs in the face of the geographic rotation principle, which has been followed for many years, and certain member states will certainly dislike that. But we feel it should be an open and merit-based process in which there should be candidates put forward their candidacies, as you do for other UN high-level positions, has been increasingly the practice for some years, and that the General Assembly should have a role in being able to consider the merits of those candidates. Secondly, that the Security Council should itself open up the process by putting forward more than one candidate for the General Assembly's consideration, which gives it a genuine choice. Mm-hmm. The other element to our proposal, which is actually quite an important one because it strengthens the independence of the Secretariat and thus the authority of the Secretary General, is that the Secretary General should serve a single 7-year term and not 2 5-year terms, and as a consequence, therefore be less beholden to member states in order to be able to get re-election. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any reaction from the panel either on that proposal or the idea of a standing UN army or Iran? Jan, first.
I think the standing UN military force is a lovely idea, but not even the EU is able to get this done, which is a much more coherent organization, I would say. So it is something for our wish list, but not immediately available. I mean, we had the Sherbrigg in the past. It's like the EU battle groups never used. And it's something on paper, and as long as we do not really, as member states, commit that we really put, and I don't see that, we have our military colleagues also here, to put soldiers of a nation state at the disposal, and also on the sort of, they can dispose wherever they need them. I don't see this anytime soon. On the choice of the Secretary General, I couldn't agree more. It is one of the most opaque ways of choosing an important position. Switzerland, whereas Jörg and Austria, we're together in this group called ACT, Accountability, Coherence, and Transparency. And we're also working as a group of 30 SMSs, as I call them, trying to get a little more transparency into the whole UN system. And I think we also going to come up with ideas there. Thank you very much for that. But I, being sort of this realist, I think it's important that we push. Do I believe the next Secretary General will be chosen a different way? I don't think so.
Oh, keep going across, Michael.
Sure. On the standing army, it would be. Let me just turn it around and imagine that we live in a perfect world. Then that question wouldn't even be necessary, because the UN is not there to fight wars; it's there to prevent them. So instinctively, I'm not particularly for having an. Given where we live today, in the world we live in, then of course it would make sense, particularly because it would be a sort of a much more proactive physical manifestation of the multilateralism that we need to get back into, and would take away a number of the inefficiencies that we see today in the peacekeeping machinery, which is quite extraordinary. I'm always surprised at what we actually do achieve rather than at the stuff that we don't achieve. And this is entirely boils down to the roles of individuals that leads these missions, etc. And that's a whole different kind of discussion. On the selection of the Secretary General, I want to add two things, also a source of personal irritation at times. And it's all very well to talk about opening up and democratizing the process of selecting a Secretary General. But then you have to look at the other side of that particular coin and pay really serious attention to the context that you put that person in and the framework that you put a Secretary General in today's world. Any sane person who is not extraordinarily drawn to the post because of vanity, who takes a serious look at the constraints that a Secretary General has to operate under today with the absolutely debilitating and paralyzing micromanagement by member states, a fifth committee that doesn't function anymore, and the whole, I mean, I can go on forever. But the fact is that you're putting a person into a system of a quite extraordinary importance and reach. And before you even start the jobs, your hands are tied. At the administrative procedures, just to start with one, and the fact that it's underfunded and it simply doesn't work anymore. And that's just as important to address that part of the equation as it is to address the sort of democratization of the process itself. And finally, on this topic, I think also it's important to look at the pool in which we go fishing for candidates. We always assume that it has to be somebody who either comes from government or from the diplomatic world. I see absolutely no reason why the next Secretary General cannot be a CEO of a major multinational company who by and large will have much more international experience and certainly much more management experience than most candidates that otherwise would be presenting themselves.
The way that Michael describes being the SG, I think it's more attractive to be the president of IPI, no? Okay. Do you want to take the question on Iran and the SG?
First actually I will just echo what Jan said concerning a standing army or all that jazz. That it's a wonderful idea, but it's not very realistic given the power context we are in today. And actually, I think the elders' idea on the election process is brilliant. But timing is everything, and with the constellations you have in the Security Council today, with the conflicts in the Middle East, the Crimea, the Ukraine, etc., the South China Sea, I don't think it's very realistic that you will have fundamental changes. But I like the idea, and of course, your timing is that the new Secretary General is going to be elected within the next couple of years, so it's the right time to go out with it. But the timing doesn't give realism for implementing it a very high degree of chance. Let me also say a couple of things about the UN as a negotiator. Again, fit for purpose. There are certain negotiations internationally which the UN is not fit for doing. And we have to be realistic about it. I mean, should the UN take over the 5+1 negotiations with Iran? It's not fit to do it. I don't think 5+1 necessarily is the best tool to do it, because it's ignoring neighbors who have a very deep vested interest in it, like Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states and Israel. But it's a better tool than the UN would be in the current situation. Let me also add here that in this context, that I do believe that one of the reasons why we have so much instability, chaos, and anarchy in the Middle East, and it will regrettably continue for many, many years to come, is that there is no regional institution for peace and security. And the UN cannot replace a regional organization for peace and security. The Foreign Minister of Bahrain have called for this on many occasions over the last few years, and he's completely right. So this is the UN cannot do anything about the basic security problems in the Middle East. It's only a homegrown security organization which can do it and give the necessary stability. And I think that is the greatest challenge for international peace and security in that part of the world. I could elaborate on this, but I'll let it rest with that.
Kande, did you want to take it?
I like the elders' idea very much. You get a Security Council and the big guys screening and maybe giving us 2 candidates to the GA. That's my personal view. Everything you said, Mike, I fully agree with. He comes in, but his hands are tied. Committee level. Personality matters. I remember our last meeting with Kofi as Chief Executive Board. We had a nice retreat, and we were musing now. And then finally, one of my colleagues said, okay, Mr. Annan, what is the one thing you'll tell us finally? He said, remember that you're standing on a pulpit. Sometimes you have to say something for the voiceless. And of course, we forced him to give a few examples. And just to summarize, he said, sometimes in very difficult circumstances, you have to say something so the voiceless can quote you. They can say to the president, according to Mr. Annan, we are not doing well in this area. It's not me, it is Mr. Annan. He said, that's what civil society and others do. He said, so once in a while, you must be ready to do that, knowing that you're going to run into trouble with some folks. He said, because it's about, again, peace, stability, and human rights. Second, I see in Ban Ki-moon a similar thing. And one area where if the UN is going to be fit for purpose, it must begin to anticipate issues, not always react. Energy, climate change is one area where Ban chose to do that. It's not a sexy subject. It's not a subject the UN like to talk about. He says, but I know that energy is the golden thread. We are not ready for it. We don't have an institutional arrangement. I will put my political capital here, work with a coalition of member states and corporates and civil society to do something about it till the UN is ready. And I think that given how fast our problems emerge and then suddenly become bigger, you need to begin to anticipate problems. And these 2 personalities, the pulpit, moral authority, the Secretary General must be able to do that, and it requires a lot of courage. Anticipating. Last one, on the standing force, I have not given it a thought. Let me do a visceral reaction. I seem to like it. Because what I see in some conflict, given our country as an example and others, sometimes the conflicts happen fast, and then the militaristic hardliners draw the boundaries by moving troops quickly. Maybe in some circumstances, it makes sense to send a force quick, peacekeeper, observer mission, but not an observer mission of just aiding. A robust force that says, please stay where you are, let's jaw, not war, because the boundaries become drawn quickly. And when you want to negotiate, people don't want to pull back. So I seem to romanticize a little bit with this. An anecdote here is, I was there when we had to evacuate in 1999. And the observer mission was in Sierra Leone, 80 people. They moved out about 60 people quickly. Now, I was in Guinea, and we had been evacuated on Christmas Day. I was there on holidays, and Okello had to come back in. So in the briefing there, he said, the troops, the rebels are coming in. The observer mission is out. There's nobody to stop these guys taking over the capital. So I took my laissez-passer, I'll give it to assistant. I said, tell Ambassador Okello I can go back with him to tell the president. So I went to Okello, I said, does the president know this? He said, no. I said, I'll go back with you. He cleared me to go. But the observer mission was out already. And of course the rebels came in and massacred thousands of people. That's when the world woke up and said, okay, now we need a more robust peacekeeping force. So I'm kind of romanticizing there. Let's not let the militaristic people draw the lines for negotiating too quickly. Sometimes it's hard to pull back.
I think 2 words that will stick with me from this meeting are anticipation and prevention. I think these are 2 key issues. Terry, very briefly, because then we'll have one last round.
I wanted to take the floor precisely on that issue, and it was Michael who spurred me to say what I'm going to say now, namely that the UN is not created to make war, it's created to prevent war. And this is precisely your point here. And I was saying earlier that Lebanon is an island of stability and this arc of instability, which we now have in the Middle East. And then, I mean, what Kofi Annan at the time saw was that an Israeli presence in southern Lebanon was a threat to peace and security in the region. So he wanted to do preventive diplomacy, working with then Prime Minister Barak of Israel, in order to convince him and the Israeli government to pull out of Lebanon in the interest of international peace and security. And precisely the same happened 4 years later with Bashar al-Assad, who pulled out his 45,000 troops of Lebanon. Think today, if you had 45,000 Syrian troops in Lebanon, think today if Israel still was occupying the whole of southern Lebanon. This is preventive diplomacy. So what you do, you anticipate, you look, you analyze and say, where are the risks? And then you try to move the constellations to reduce the risk and create resilience against war. And this is what, I mean, the core of what the UN should do related to international peace and security. Because when the conflict is there, it's 100 times more difficult to solve the problem.
And somebody mentioned yesterday, I think it was John, the precedent of UNPREDEP as a preventive deployment. Okay, very last round. Any comments from anything you've heard today? I have Louise Shelley and then the two gentlemen here.
Dr. Yomkala, you talked about a different model that has functioned under the UN that brings together corporations, civil society, countries. Do you see this applicable to any other issues within the UN structure where it could be helpful and invigorating?
Okay, two gentlemen here, sir.
Thank you. My name is Rajiv Mishra. I'm the ambassador of India to Austria. That was a very interesting session, but what left me somewhat dissatisfied was how you managed to completely ignore the elephant in the room, which is how unrepresentative the Security Council has become. And in a discussion today of how we are failing to address the major challenges to peace and security all over the world, I would have liked to hear the panel's thoughts, if not on the direction in which change should take place, but at least on the need for that change to occur. We're talking here of the apex institution charged by the world for maintenance of peace and security today, whose structure, architecture, mandate, etc., dates back to 1945. 70 years later, it's a far more complex world, far more numerous world. In every conceivable way, the world has changed so much. I mean, I don't want to go on and on, but certainly some thoughts on that I should welcome very much from the panel. Thank you.
We don't want anyone to leave our meetings disappointed, so I know that the panel will tackle the Security Council. Najib.
Thank you. I just want to address my remark to both Tari and Michael. From our work together in that particular context, South Lebanon and Syria. And my question is, how come the UN did not ensure sustainability, although it has become a slogan, in terms of the, I wouldn't say success, I would say the growing process of a peacekeeping approach or political approach. We had the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from southern Lebanon. It was followed up by a bit of development. Then Tari went to Bashar Assad, asking him to remove his troops from Syria with the background of the Iraqi war. Of course, Bashar Assad has that in his background. All of a sudden, that mission seemed to have faded away, and the process disappeared. What's left only is 1559. In 2006, Tari, I think 1 year after you pulled out from that mission, with Lebanon and Israel went back into the worst conflict. And then look at Syria now. Iraq has become a piece of cake in comparison to what's going on in Syria. My question is, the UN has failed, I'm sorry to be still a UN, has failed to ensure a kind of sustainability and follow-up to these operations. Why?
Okay, let's go the other way this time. Kande, on
the model we've created for energy could apply to food security and agribusiness. We need to increase food production by 70% by 2050, assuming climate change does not completely devastate the agricultural bases around the world, particularly in Africa. We need to do the same for water. And what that addresses is, I think the other panel also said, avoiding the silo mentality in the implementation of the SDGs. Now it's nexus. These things are connected. If you take energy, the work done by IPI Vienna, we've been doing studies now on energy, water, and security. Not energy security, but energy, water, and security. We see an interface, 22 hotspots around the world, where future conflicts might arise because of water or because of water and energy combined. And climate change will be the biggest risk multiplier of that conflict. So you need to combine. And there, again, you need private sector solutions, you need active civil society involvement, and significant reform of policy, public policy in water, food, and energy as a nexus. So getting that nexus approach will be applicable to food and also to water and sanitation. Ambassador of India, thank you for saying it. I'm dreaming of 2 African Security Council seats, and I fully agree with you, and will campaign for it. It's about time.
Thierry, Security Council reform and Middle East?
No, I agree with everything which the Ambassador of India said, and also what my good friend here said about that particular topic. But then the question is realism. A few years ago, there actually was a very serious debate within the P5, and some of them, several, were actually pretty conducive to do a reform of the Security Council, roughly in the direction you indicated. But as conflicted and paralyzed as the Council is today, that's not a very realistic, or that hope is not very realistic today. Again, it's the context. And here I would like to come back to something Professor Novak said earlier, and it's related to that timing is everything. And there was in the Eastern Europe, Western Europe constellations after 1989, there was a window of opportunity. Gorbachev used the term the House of Europe. And I agree with you. I mean, if that window of opportunity had been grabbed by the West, we would have been in a completely different place today. But that window of opportunity is gone. Hopefully it might come back, but it's not there. So in order to reform the Council, you have to look at a situation where the current powers in the Council are open-minded in order to have that debate. And I'm afraid, I hope I'm wrong, that open-mindedness, unfortunately, is not there today. But I emphasize, I agree with everything you said about the proposals, etc. And there are several other proposals related to the elders as well, which is highly relevant and very commendable in this regard.
Kande, you wanted to react?
Can I give a footnote on timing?
Footnote.
Ambassador, we tie our support for any future SG candidate in the next election to their willingness to reform it. We were hopeful that by now, that reform would have taken place. 10 years went by. The discussion started at Kofi's time. Now we're finishing another 2 terms, I believe, to make it happen, because there will never be a good time. We have to force the issue. Let us tie our regional support, African support, and other regions to say, look, if we elect you, your colleagues chose tough topics in their own era. One tough topic we give you is UN Security Council reform, because I also share that council needs to be inclusive if there will be peace, prosperity, and stability. We know now that some conflicts started in failed states have huge implications up north. Therefore, the Security Council has to be more robust. So I think we make it conditional. Then we can force the issue on timing, because there will never be a good time.
Mr. Future President of Sierra Leone, I hear you loud and clear. And I'm quite sure your constituencies do that as well. Look,
on Najib's question. Yeah.
I didn't answer Najib. Actually, again, it's timing. At the beginning of the Syria crisis, I think there was a possibility of doing something at the very, very beginning, because then you could forge alliances, which later was not possible to do, because the conflict also internationally and regionally got deeper and deeper. So right now, I think there's nothing to do. Which again, I mean, for our good friend, the UN envoy, Stefan de Mistura, he has mission impossible for the time being. And because whatever you do in this current situation, you can't resolve the conflict diplomatically. So again, it's realism and timing, which is of paramount importance. Just one little other thing, and that is the pulpit and the negotiating table. And here, I would like to emphasize the point I made earlier. I mean, if you choose to stay in the pulpit all the time and issue sermons, then you will never be invited to the negotiating table. So you have to make a balancing act here. Do you want to be the political prince and resolve the issue and be invited to the table? Or do you want to slap the faces of everybody who's supposed to sit at the table? And this is a very hard choice, and sometimes it is correct, ethically and morally, to slap the faces. But then you have to realize that you blow yourself away from the negotiating table. These are hard choices, and I'm not saying that you should not go into the pulpit. Sometimes you have to go into the pulpit because it's your damn duty to do it. But at other times, you have to calibrate it so that you are actually capable of getting to the table, because if you don't get to the table, you can't negotiate anything to restore international peace and security. Thank you.
Michael, on Security Council reform.
Well, actually, I have comments on both, but on Security Council reform, I'm going to be a little bit more radical. We've been trying to, and it's not that we forgot, we were just waiting for you to ask the question, Ambassador. I mean, it's obviously something we in a discussion like this, you have to approach. We've been trying to reform the Council 25 years now, and frankly, and I'm taking off my UN hat, I'm speaking personally, I firmly believe that the path of reform that has been chosen is not realistic. We can add 4, 5, 6 new members to the current makeup. It's not going to make the Council more representative, it certainly is not going to make it more effective, and it's not going to make it more legitimate. People around the world are not going to be convinced that the Council is suddenly going to wake up and actually do its work simply because we add 3 or 4 more people. We have to think totally outside the box on this one, and that's not something that our member states are known for, but nevertheless, reality always imposes itself on all of us sooner or later, including on the system. So let me throw out in a very sketchy form an idea as food for thought, and it's in the realm right now, as Terry just said, maybe wishful thinking, because we can find all sorts of caveats why it's not possible to do so. But I think that we are coming to the time, also because of the way that the world has evolved and our understanding of how, as I said earlier, the complexity of the problems that we have and the complexities of the solutions require a completely different way of working, also from the Security Council, in a much more integrated way. It's no longer good enough to tackle security issues by just looking at security issues. You have to look at the root causes, you have to look at the social, the economic, the cultural, all of these elements that make up the foundation of a crisis that we have called to deal with. My idea would be to look at a 2-tier Security Council where you have 5 regional security councils that would take the first shot at some of the problems that happen in these regions. It would add the ability to tackle a much broader palette, if you want, of underlying problems that forced the crisis in the first place. It would allow the time and the resources and the wherewithal for these councils to bring in other actors into the conversation, not just as a token, but as a serious conversation, and also down the road as part of the decision making. We're talking about multi-stakeholder partnerships. It's the way of the future, I think, in terms of governance of the planet. And it would de-internationalize, in a sense, some of the problems that we had. I'm convinced that many of the problems that we've been dealing with over the past decades have been exacerbated by the fact that they go to the Security Council. And if they had been dealt with in a regional context, and somebody mentioned it just before, it was you, Terry, we would probably have had a greater solution, a faster solution. I always remember many years ago when I was still young and naive, now I'm just naive, I ran into this old hand Norwegian ambassador in Tehran where I'd been posted, and we were talking about the Middle East. And he told me two things that stuck with me, and there probably many of you have heard it before. But he said, first of all, that the Middle East was a family feud that had been allowed to be internationalized. And the second was that if you think you know what's going on, it just means you're misinformed. And those two together underline a little bit what I was saying. So anyway, I think that we have to think very differently about the way that we construct a Security Council reform that really, truly is going to be the arbiter of the peace and security of this planet in the decades to come. I don't think that what we have now works, and I don't think that if we just expand it, it's going to work any better than what we have now. There's all sorts of issues, veto and other things that come in, but I really truly think that all of us have to think very, very differently about how we do it. To Najib's question, the UN, and we've said it before, it's a matter of how you define the UN. The UN is a tool. In the particular case of Syria, its role is to be, right now at least, a very a highly paid fig leaf. And the fig leaf is usually used to hide stuff, in this case to hide the inaction by the member states, and particularly both the regional ones and the powerful ones, who really have the wherewithal to do something about it. At least they had, as Terry said, at the beginning of the crisis. Whether it's possible now, I think it is. All crises are solvable. I mean, so it depends on how you define success and how do you define effectiveness. If our role, as Mr. Gowan said, alluded to, is also to be the dumping ground for problems that are in the too difficult tray for most countries at any particular historical moment, then we are pretty successful, because we've been dumped on for a long time in that region, and that unfortunate reason. And I'm just wondering, if you turn around the thing, if we weren't there to be dumped on, and if it was just a free-for-all that nobody wanted to tackle, I would feel I think that things would be a lot worse. Syria is a good example, actually, of what I was saying earlier in terms of looking at the activities of the system in a much broader way. While the Security Council is sitting on its hands on Syria, our colleagues are providing food, are providing vaccinations, are providing help to the displaced and to the refugees at an unprecedented scale, which most of us kind of forget, and certainly the press doesn't talk too much about. But the fact is that the system itself is doing remedial things. It's not doing the prevention that it ought to do, and we'll hopefully get there one day. But it's more than just the peace and security in the narrow sense that we're looking at, and we need to look at the broader picture.
Thanks.
When we talk about whether we're successful or not.
Jan, are you still looking forward to being the Austrian ambassador to the UN?
Of course. It's probably the most interesting place to serve, because there the whole world is united, and I think no other organization is placed to meet the challenges of the world. To the Security Council reform, everybody talks about Security Council reform and means enlargement. This is a very, and you of course want this in the G4 proposal, adding 4 permanent members additionally to the 5, the same rights, veto rights, 2 more Africans, 11 countries with veto rights. Apart from that, I'd be curious to see which 2 countries from Africa would you propose, but I take back that question because you're in election mode. Where does it bring us with the effectiveness? What does it mean for us, the small and medium-sized countries? Austria tries every 25, 30 years to get on the council. If we're successful, it's wonderful to be in there, just to find out that we're a second-class member of the Security Council, where the P5 draft their resolutions, and we can only raise our hand. We have to tackle the working methods. We have to tackle the inclusivity, the transparency. This is not a group which is representing the world community at large. So I think it's just too short, the proposals which are on the table. They don't go far enough for us, and we want to have an inclusive approach which also will tackle the working methods, but not in the back chamber. Everything is being, including the nomination of the Secretary General, being talked back there. We are 193 members of the United Nations. We should somehow be included in the decision making. Lesser degree maybe because we're smaller, but still we should. And I think this is what all the proposals should be taking into account.
Thanks very much. Obviously, there are many more issues to discuss. This is a process that will continue, but I'd like to thank the panel members for their open views and give them a round of applause, please. Terry will make a few closing remarks, just a couple more minutes.
So, dear friends, we have now come to the end of the 45th seminar. And I feel, even if I was not present for much of the time yesterday, that it has been a good one. I feel there has been lively and open debates on a range of very hot topics, and I think this panel illustrated it. I think there were candid and honest and straightforward answers to all your questions. I think you all have certainly provided us with plenty of food for thought for the Independent Commission on Multilateralism. So I'd like to inform you that the ICM continues this Friday and Saturday with a retreat in New York based on the issue of fragile states and fragile cities. And there will be an ICM meeting again here in Vienna in September on non-proliferation. And it will be followed by a major meeting in Geneva on dealing more effectively for pandemics. And I think we got some very interesting inputs for that discussion in the panel yesterday. And in early September, IPI will host a high-level meeting in Salzburg on the rule of law and the laws of war. So it will be a very busy autumn as well. And I'll promise you, we will keep you all posted on what we are doing. Before concluding, I would like to thank the team that has made this event possible. From the Austrian Foreign Ministry, Mikael Rendi, Misha, thank you. Evelyn Jamek, Johannes Irschik, Ingrid Kuhn, and from the Ministry for Defense and Sports, Robert Fritz, Astrid Holzinger, and from the National Defense Academy, Benedict, where are you? Benedict has been with us for the last 10 years, and he's the guy who actually organizes everything. Thank you, Benedict. And Ali Staubmann, also from the National Defense Academy. And I would also like to use the opportunity to thank the IPI team here in Vienna, led by Andrea and Walter, but also Johanna, Jenna, Max, and Catherine, who's been with us basically for 24 hours over the last couple of days and has put in hours and hours in preparing together with our Austrian partners. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for being such active participants, as just exemplified. I was really impressed standing here yesterday to see standing room only, a full house. And I had the feeling that this is maybe one of the hottest tickets in political Vienna, maybe with the exception, possible exception of the Eurovision Song Contest. I am in a very understated mood today, as you can see. Together, I hope we have demonstrated that the IPI Vienna seminar is certainly fit for purpose. So I wish you safe travel and hope to see you next year, probably before. So, gute Reise und auf Wiedersehen. Thank you.